The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Will he suspend or change his timetable for the proposed sell-down of state-owned assets in light of the current economic circumstances? If not, why not?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, there is no timetable for extending the mixed ownership model. The government has always said it will take this policy to the electorate in November, and we are not making plans before that time.
The Speaker. Point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, I seek the leave of the House to table this document, the responses to estimates review questions FEC that points out the timetable for the sale of state-owned assets.
Order, is this though a document for, this is a document that actually the Parliament has?
Well, I would have thought so, but the Prime Minister is obviously not aware
no, we
of
don't table those documents. There's a supplementary question, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, as he's already booked the sale of shares in state-owned enterprises in this year's budget, is he still prepared to sell those shares, even if it means lower prices in a depressed market?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, firstly, it's very important that we correct the error from the Leader of the Opposition, because he's prone to having quite a few of them. I've got his transcript from this morning. But
point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I think you understand what the point of order is. That's not an appropriate way to begin an answer to a question.
I think the point's well made. There's no need for that kind of comment. There's no problem with disputing information contained in a question, but making a derogatory comment about another, especially the questioner, is not on. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, there isn't a timetable. There is a zero capital budget in budgets 2012 to 16, but in fact any of the dividend streams and the income that would be reflected from a sale of shares through the mixed ownership model actually aren't in budgets 2012 to 16. Mr Speaker, as I said yesterday, of course the government, if we were the government post November 26, would take into account the financial conditions at the time, but the reality is that if there was any timing difference, it's likely to be months, certainly not one that would affect the overall thing. If there was one, I said.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
A supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Is the budget 2011 estimate that even after the sale of SOE shares, the government debt will double in the next 5 years accurate? If so, what guarantee is there that a future national government would not use that as a pretext to sell down even further shares than he's already announced?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no, that's not correct, and that was the very basis under which I made the statement earlier that the member often gets his figures wrong. In fact, gross debt this year is $78 billion in New Zealand. In 5 years it'll be $86 billion. A doubling of $78 billion would be $156 billion, Mr Speaker. It's very similar to the way that the member said this morning that the government's bond program would be $16.7 billion for this year. In fact, it's not.
Order. I don't think that's quite necessary to answer the question. Point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, I wonder if I could seek the leave of the House to table the budget document that shows that gross government debt will double in the next 5 years.
Order. Now, I just stopped the Prime Minister on the one hand, and the Leader of the Opposition is now misusing point of order. He knows budget documents are not, so we don't seek leave to table those. Supplementary question, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The supplementary question, Mr Speaker. How does the one-off sale of shares in state-owned enterprises and annual tax cuts of nearly $2.5 billion for the top 10% of earners, while the government is borrowing over $16 billion this year, protect New Zealand in an uncertain global economy?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the government isn't borrowing $16.7 billion this year. The government is borrowing $5.1 billion, and the tax cuts the members refer to were fiscally neutral. If the member wants to go back to the policy he adopted when he thought he was a bus driver, which frankly he was better at than being Leader of the Opposition, he's welcome to reverse the policy.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, was the Prime Minister not following the advice of the Chief Executive Officer of the Bank of New Zealand, Andrew Thorburn, who said on the weekend that what this country needs in the face of global uncertainty is a change of tax regime, such as a capital gains tax, to disincentivise investment in housing and to encourage investment in the productive sector?
The Honourable Prime
Mr. Speaker,
Minister.
I think Mr Thorburns wrong. And if one goes and have a look at the changes the government made in Budget 2010, we took $1 billion out of the property market in terms of changes to depreciation and the likes. In my view, if you put a capital gains tax on a company that would otherwise be employing people and on its activities, you will dampen actually investment.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
If the Chief Executive of the BNZ, Andrew Thorburn, is wrong, is the Chief Economist of Westpac, Dominic Stevens, also wrong when he says, quote, New Zealanders are incentivised to borrow money to buy land rather than invest in productive assets, and that a capital gains tax is necessary to reduce those sort of distortions.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, in my opinion, yes.
The Honourable Leader of the
Speaker,
Opposition.
Is the former Secretary of Treasury, John Whitehead, and the Reserve Bank also wrong when they say that a capital gains tax would remove significant distortions in the tax system and support and strengthen the productive sector, which is exactly what this country needs in face of global recession?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, what John Whitehead was referring to was an extension of the capital gains tax that's already currently in place to include the family home. And what I think we're hearing actually from the Leader of the Opposition, I think New Zealanders should listen carefully, is actually by stealth, given a chance, Labor would bring in a capital gains tax on the family home.
Order. Ministers shouldn't speculate on order. I'm on my feet. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, supplementary question.
Mr Speaker, can I seek the leave of
point of order, is that a big pun?
Point of order, sorry, sir. Can I seek the leave of the House to table this quote from Treasury Secretary John Whitehead?
Before we do the quote, the source of the document.
The source of the document is www.knowledgebasket.co.nz, and it was in the on November of last year, sir.
The member may indicate no.
What the document says is that the Treasury had explored the introduction of a capital gains tax as a means of removing significant distortions from the tax system.
Leavers sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is.
I take it you might.
There is
look it up
objection.
and read it then,
Question of the Honourable John Biscown. Supplementary question.
Supplementary to the Prime Minister. Doesn't he believe that the real issue facing the country is reducing government expenditure rather than trying to find and invent new ways to raise it, such as a capital gains tax?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I think the member has a point, and that was why we ran a zero budget going into Budget 2011, despite the fact that the country was facing the crisis that presented itself as a result of the Christchurch earthquakes. And I think, Mr Speaker, this government has been very fiscally responsible. It has got to a point where we'll be back in surplus within a few years. We will not be running the debt levels that a Labor government would if it was elected post-November 27. And New Zealand simply can't afford the policies that Labor's promoting.
Question number 3, Tim McIndoe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.